life happens. No problem.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I wouldn't
Hello.
mind
Welcome. It is Wednesday, October 7th, 7:02 p.m. on the East Coast. I always like saying that because it always makes me sound like I'm a newscaster. It has nothing to do with this stream. I just like to say it like that. Actually, it's 7:02 on the East Coast. It is 10:02 a.m. on the Australian coast, which is where Carly is joining us from. So have to represent her time zone as well. She's joining us from the future, which is very exciting. Please, let us know you're here. Say hello. Let us know where you're from. As always, we'd like to give you a couple minutes to get in and get settled before we start. So please say hi. And this is where we are quiet for a second. Pretend we're busy, like doing important things.
Everybody's watching the Union Cincinnati soccer game, I believe.
Something.
So if you're just joining us, we've got another minute before we sort of get rolling. Please let us know you're here. Say hello. Let us know where you're from. Betsy thinks everyone's watching the soccer game. I don't know. Let's prove her wrong. But say hi so we can give you a shout out. We've got a really great conversation for you today. We've got really fantastic guests, so I'm excited to dive into this. So please say hello. And if not, it's okay too. We'll start in just about 15 seconds. Seemed like a good arbitrary amount of time. Betsy, do you play darts?
Yes. Well, actually, that's one of my exposures. I had to put a picture on there and throw darts at it.
I thought it was to stand in front of the dartboard while people were playing. But that's fine.
I like playing, but I don't like it with the picture there. Believe me.
I never played. I don't think I've ever played darts, like in a formal bar setting, at least.
Yeah. It's fun.
Hi, Becky from Utah. Thank you for joining. All right. It's just about 2 minutes after. Let's get started. But I encourage you, if you're just joining us, to please say hello. Let us know where you're from. We'd love to give you a shout out. And with that, let's get started. So my name is Ethan. I'm the National Ambassador for the International OCD Foundation, which simply means, as I always say, I have OCD and like to talk about it at this point ad nauseum. Tonight's topic is OCD in Older Adults, Volume 2, which simply means we've done it once before, but this time with a new lovely guest as well in Betsy. So we're very excited to have Betsy join Carly and Valerie. Let me quickly get through some housekeeping, and then we will jump right into everything. So this town hall is intended to serve as educational content and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you are in distress or feel unsafe. If you're in a crisis or if you're feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911, or call the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255. As always, we want to be respectful and kind to everyone in the room. We are talking about sensitive topics, and we are also live on the interwebs, and so we want to create as safe a space as possible. Hi.
Okay, go.
I'm waving. Valerie's about to kill someone on live stream. Yeah, it's like it's going down. It's going to get violent in a minute. But as always, we want to keep as safe a space as possible. So please always be respectful of everyone in the room. With that, let me start introducing our panelists. So just above me, we have Dr. Carly Johnco. Hi, Carly. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing good. Carly is a clinical psychologist and senior research fellow at the Department of Psychology at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. Her research is focused on understanding factors that affect the development and treatment of anxiety and related disorders across the lifespan, with a particular focus on youth and older adulthood. She has written over 60 journal articles and book chapters and has received more than $3.5 million in funding to support her research. Dr. Johnco was recently awarded an IOCDF grant to examine the nature of OCD in older adults and develop a treatment that is tailored to meet the needs of older clients. This project is looking to get the opinions of clinicians who work with late life OCD, older adults who have experienced OCD, and their family members and close friends. So thank you, Carly. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be back.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely dive into a little bit about what you're up to and all the exciting things happening in your life. Also, if you're just joining us, please let us know you're here and say hello. I know lots of things are going on tonight. Feel free to pop in and out. We will be here. Next, we have who you may recognize from before and from everywhere, Valerie Andrews, dear friend, dear advocate. Valerie went to see her very first therapist in 2009. 2 years later, in 2011, she was diagnosed with OCD and GAD, general anxiety disorder. In search of answers and peer support, she came across the IOCDF, attending her very first conference in 2017. We have a good story about that. I basically tackled her and her husband. And seeing the need for outreach within the faith communities of color, she made a commitment to God in both communities to continue to advocate and address the issues between the two. See, it's in your bio, Valerie. You have experience. In hopes of bringing a sense of value to women and glory to God. She has been active ever since. Her latest attention has been getting her nonprofit status, which I think you have now, right?
Yes.
So
As of September 21st.
Congratulations on Valerie's brand new 501c3, her nonprofit, Miss Mabel Sparrows, which we can put in the link, which focuses on women of color, women of faith, and women over 40 years of age suffering from OCD and mental anxieties. But welcomes women from anywhere to learn and acknowledge that they are unique and wonderfully made. And ultimately, it is one's service, not size, that counts. So thank you, Valerie.
Oh, you're welcome.
Last but not least, and the author of this town hall, who came up with the idea in the first place, we have Betsy. Betsy is retired after working 39 years in education as a teacher and then a school counselor. She has a daughter in college and lives with her husband and Buster the cat. I'm glad you said the cat because I was like, her husband and Buster, you live with two men. Okay. As a young girl, Betsy remembers having perfectionistic tendencies and always wanted to do the right thing. In 1980, when completing her master's degree, compulsions kicked in. Her first therapist diagnosed Betsy as neurotic. In 1997, finally, she received the OCD diagnosis, but it wasn't until 2019 that effective ERP therapy began, which is absolutely horrendous. However, I'm glad you're here today. So thank you so much, Betsy, for joining us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We have some comments. So there's Rana, Steve, Stephanie, and Nikki in Ireland, who I adore. Thank you all for being here. As always, before we get rolling, please don't hesitate to comment, say hello, leave us questions, comments, concerns. We will definitely get to them. Stephanie actually wrote, "Wow, Betsy, thank you for your years of teaching and support."
Oh,
What did you teach?
I taught 4th graders and 5th graders, and then for a little while 6th graders, and then I was a guidance counselor for 22 years in a middle school. I loved it.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, let's go ahead and start with you, Betsy. So I would love, for those that don't know you, and I don't know that I even know you very well, I would love to hear a little bit more about your journey with OCD and how you've come to where you are.
Okay. Being older, I have a lot of history, so I'm going to try to condense this. But I remember when I was a young girl, adolescent especially, I wanted to get 100 on a spelling test in order to allow myself to go to a football game. I was putting that on myself. I went to the local library, and I had to make sure my makeup was on. Just little things like that I'm recalling. And then I was babysitting, and I got scared when the baby was crying. I thought, what's going to happen? I better not do anything. And I just, so I stopped watching babies, but I then watched, older kids, and I felt more comfortable with that. And of course, that's my interest. I wanted to go into education. And then this is where this came up. I also wanted to be very religious at that time, and my family wasn't. So I was putting a lot of pressures on myself to do the right thing, to be the best I can be. I wouldn't be with anybody who smoked, Miss Goody Two Shoes I was. And then I went through high school or college, and my major was elementary education. got a wonderful teaching job, went on for my master's in counseling, and that's when I started to check my stove, make sure my iron was off, called the school and said, I hope I didn't leave the record player plugged in, all these things that just seemed odd to me, but I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't talk to my parents because they weren't aware. They were both great blue collar workers, but they didn't know psychology. And so I said, hey, I'm in an apartment. I'm 2 hours away from them. I'm dealing with this myself. And just within the last 2 years, I told my brothers about it. And my parents have since passed away. So I was doing this on my own after my master's degree, and went to this therapist, and he was a bioenergetic therapist. And that had a lot to do with working with the body. And we used to use tennis rackets to beat out the anger that I had. But I was not that angry. It was just I had these thoughts. And
What year was this, if you don't mind me asking?
This was 80s, 80 to 90.
And how old were you at that time?
I was about 30, 31. Okay. And then I got married when I was 44, first time, and I'm still with him. And he's a big support person for me, but I was watching Oprah in 96, 97, and I saw that she had on Edna Foa. And Edna Foa, as some of you know, is kind of a person who worked quite diligently in finding ways to deal with OCD.
She's the mother of exposure response prevention, if you will.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. And so I called down there, and they were doing a study on anafranil. And so I went to EPI, Eastern Pennsylvania Psychiatric Institute, and I went there for an appointment, and they diagnosed me as having OCD. And that was around 97. I had an intern who was working there, and she was great, and we were getting along, and she was doing ERP with me and up and down steps and doing all the things that I've had difficulty with. But I still kept my job, I had to. It was just more of the checking after work, after school. I'd be checking things, in the halls, or it was embarrassing, and driving home. And then when I got home, there was still more going on, but most of my compulsions were after work. I was busy. I loved what I did, but it did interfere afterwards. And also before I went to school, like I'd be putting on my makeup, a very silly thing, but I start with my left and end with the right, because left is left and right is right.
When did things really go downhill for you?
Oh gosh. I think probably between 95 and 2000 now, when I'm, it was really 95 when that's when I got married. And then after the wedding and things, just my life had changed, and I was it was all new as a transition. And then we bought a house, and it was a lot to deal with.
I'm going to get back to you in one.
Okay.
Yeah. No, please. I want to get back to you in 1 sec, but I think there's more to mine from there. Valerie, we definitely know parts of your story. And I think what's important for you is that, a lot of your journey, Carly will disagree in probably calling both of you older adults, because like the average age that she works with, as we found out from last time, is between 90 and 100 or 110, or like people that I didn't even realize. I'm not making light of it. It's just like when we talked to her before and Valerie's like, I'm 60 something. She's like, oh, you're a baby. So I don't want to, I feel like Carly will criticize me if I say, oh, Valerie, the older adult. But I think one of the important things that you bring to the table, and I know Betsy as well, even though she was diagnosed earlier, to be treated 23 years later is difficult. What for you, Valerie, what was the challenge in addressing these issues later in life?
Well, I think for me, because it took, I got my diagnosis when I was 54. And I think, so I was steadily trying to play catch up. And I think some of the issues that I faced personally is I had a lot of, I think now, if I'm being honest, some bitterness about, why did it take so long? And where, 10 years later, if I had only known, I would be way down the line here and so forth. And I think those was the most challenging ones for me, the regret. And I think that's where a lot of my passion comes from, that no one else has to wait that long to, um, find help or even discover what was going on. I mean, I was totally, totally lost. And so I think that's been my biggest hurdle is personally not living with the self guilt of not knowing myself, that I could been down the road. And also, I think there's a little resentment, like I said, with the medical field and the doctors and everybody else, that it took so long. And
Absolutely.
I feel too like an older adult is like, because I've always been the type of person that was easily transparent most of the time. And so it's like, I wasted all these years where I could have been helping somebody also if I knew myself what was going on. So trying to deal with all of that and just use what I have now.
Absolutely, Valerie. Thank you for that. And
Mhm.
and also, I know a lot of people just signed on, so we're just getting started. Please, please, please feel free to say hello, ask questions. We'll be diving in probably 25 minutes into your questions, but stick around. We've got a lot more to mine out. I want to transition over to Carly. We heard a little bit about your experience and what you do, and you currently have a research grant to study OCD in older adults and develop a treatment for them, or at least a new way of approaching treatment, that is. My question to you, based on what Valerie said, is how much does the lifelong self-stigma impact getting better later in life? And what are some other hurdles that you're seeing people like Valerie and Betsy and other people experience, and why it's necessary to create different protocols for older adults seeking treatment? Or not? I think that's a terrible question, and I don't think we should answer that right now. I didn't like that question to begin with. So we'll hear right back from Carly. I'm sure she will pop back on. She's coming to us from Australia, which doesn't mean anything. Hi, Carly.
Yes, she is.
Hello.
I thought you hated my question. Go ahead.
that was for some avoidance. I got most of your question. I think the bits that I heard were around how much does self-stigma impact that kind of belief that you can get better? Was that
and how much does self-stigma impact in older adults, just because they've had all of those years to really question everything? But then in addition to, like, what are other things that you're identifying that are obstacles to treatment in older adults, and which is why what you're doing is so important?
There's a huge range of barriers for older people to access mental health services in general. So we know that older people and younger people actually are the least likely to receive mental health services. And we see that across the world. We see that very much in Australia, but it's the same case in the US. And there's a range of reasons for that. So some of the reasons, there's those kind of ideas that Valerie was raising around the beliefs about how effective mental health treatment might be. This is and again, I do say Valerie and Betsy are quite young, but they certainly have both expressed experiences where they have not received good quality evidence-based treatment the first time that they went to receive it. And it's resulted in these huge time lags between when they were able to overcome these huge barriers, huge systemic barriers to accessing treatment and actually getting the treatment they need. And there are a lot of older people who will be turned off by those negative experiences. If they don't get good treatment the first time they arrive, they won't often persevere the way both of you have. And so it's fantastic that you both stuck with it and have found some good quality treatment at some point. But it's not acceptable that it took that long, and it's not acceptable that you were having to navigate a system that didn't help direct you in the right direction. So we know that older adults are the generation who saw a very different type of mental health treatment system when they were younger. This is when people with mental health problems were institutionalized or outcast. So there's often huge levels of mental health stigma and quite different levels of mental health literacy amongst older adults. We know that the research will tell us that they're often not quite as good as kind of younger or middle-aged kind of people at recognizing symptoms of mental health. They often will dismiss them as a normal part of being older. There's this sense that, you know, well, this is just who I am, or this is a normal part of getting older. You know, everyone, you know, one of the common OCD presentations would be things like worrying about your memory and excessive checking around memory. You know, well, it's just because I'm getting older and this is normal. And it's one of those big barriers that even mental health professionals actually hold a lot of these these ageist beliefs that this is normal part of becoming older, and it's very much not. What we see around the world again is that the actual prevalence rates of mental health problems decrease in older adulthood. And so this idea that it's normal to experience mental health problems as you get older because maybe you've got poor health, or you've lost a spouse, or you know, there are health problems, or, you know, a range of changes to your work situation or your living situation. It's just not the case. It's just not true. So there are some of these kind of beliefs held by individuals. There are beliefs held by, unfortunately, health professionals, you know, general practitioners, mental health professionals, psychologists, that these types of symptoms are normal. There are challenges in terms of assessing mental health problems. You know, often older people have a litany of physical health problems. And so when you go for a consultation or a checkup, those are often the things that the time is spent checking up on. And mental health is kind of the last on the list. And there is also some risks or some kind of intricacies in terms of differentiating perhaps some cognitive changes that might be relevant to things like intrusive thoughts and compulsive behaviours, and whether that might be more related to some kind of cognitive change or some kind of pathological cognitive process like an early dementia, or whether that is a sign of a transient mental health problem that should be treated and should be addressed. So there's a huge range of barriers that really
I appreciate that.
When you accessing treatment.
Betsy, do you have something?
Well, Carly, I was going to say, you know, I had a spastic colon when I was 28, 32. You know, I can't understand why a healthy woman, you know, I was healthy. And I did everything I could do. And like, why didn't the doctors like question, do you have pressure right now? Is there something going on? Or a questionnaire or something that could say, maybe there's something deeper than this, because I was keeping all this in because I was so embarrassed. I didn't want to talk to my doctor, but if they could have, you know, had a certain approach, I mean, that the mental part is so important to our physical. I mean, that really.
Our research on the relationship actually between our mental health functioning and our they call it the gut-brain axis. But we actually know that intestinal problems, we understand them a lot better now than we did 20 years ago. And that there are very clear associations oftentimes between mental health problems and gut-related issues. So probably a combination between, you know, perhaps that was something that was missed by your physician, but also potentially the research wasn't there to necessarily guide that physician at that point in time.
Right.
Carly, we know that and I'm going to get back to Valerie, of course. We know that so much of the population. Would you have thoughts, Valerie, on what they're talking about?
I was just going to say, you know, we're on the topic. I know for me, I start questioning, is this menopause? You know, because a lot of the symptoms were the same. You know, you're emotional, you're depressed, the weight gain, you know, all of those factors. And I was looking at it more in those terms than the mental issue. It was strictly the physical. So that was kind of eye-opening. And it was strictly because, you know, age is what you expect to happen. I just didn't know the severity of it.
Yeah. So these attributions that we make about what's the cause of our symptoms or what do they mean can really change who you seek treatment from. If you're thinking this is part of menopause, you're going to be requesting a very different type of health professional than if you were thinking this was a mental health condition.
Yeah, and that's systemic to the situation. I mean, I was 9 and scared to swallow, and it was OCD related. But I went to 8 ENTs, and they finally removed my tonsils. Now, whether my tonsils need to be removed, I had no idea. And looking back, I had a very common sore throat, fear of swallowing, like it's fairly common within OCD in children. So yeah, it's very hard to sort of untweeze the physical from the mental. Quickly, Carly, I'm curious. So we know from the last time, a lot of the population that you look at have been, struggling and suffering for quite some time, 30, 40, 50, 60 years before they can access treatment. How uncommon or common is onset of OCD later in life, like no history of it prior?
It does happen. It's probably a bit less common. So I don't have the actual statistics on me. And again, the research in this area is very limited. The research on the prevalence of OCD in older people is very limited. The research on age of onset is very limited. But the research that is available suggests that for the majority of people, they will have had some kind of earlier age of onset, and they will have experienced those types of symptoms for a while. But that there are a small proportion of people who will experience OCD symptoms for the first time in older adulthood. And so that might be it might be related to life circumstances, or that might be again, we're also quite mindful about the relationship between people's cognitive functioning and the first time emergence of these types of symptoms. So it's really, really important for that to be carefully assessed.
Absolutely. Thank you. Actually, Paul, I will get to everyone's questions, but this is a great question. At what approximate age does older adulthood begin for purposes of this discussion? I'll let Carly answer because I don't want to dig myself in. I would say 10 years younger than Valerie and Betsy. But when we say older adults,
I
generally,
don't like that you're calling them older.
I didn't name this thing. This is Betsy's idea.
In the research literature, typically the age 65 is the differentiation of older adulthood. And then so oftentimes that gets then broken down into young, old, and the oldest old, or even young, old, middle old, and oldest old. Because again, someone in their 90s is very different to someone in their 60s. You know, that's often a parent, or it's a completely different generation. Obviously, today we're talking about people over the age of 50, so I probably will use those terms interchangeably and call people older adults. That being said, I think in the research around retirement and things like that, they tend to use about age 50. But most of the research in mental health that talks about older adulthood is at least over the age of 60 or 65.
Thank you, Carly. We have some great questions. We have some great comments. Keep loading the comment thread. We'll get to them very, very shortly. I have a couple more questions for Betsy and Valerie, and then we'll dive in. So Betsy, as you said in your bio, you received sort of ERP and the right treatment in 2019. So you were diagnosed in 1997. You were treated 22.
Right.
I'm terrible at math, but 22 years later, I think. Number one, what did it feel like to finally? Go ahead.
But I was told I had OCD in 97.
Right, you were diagnosed.
But not with I was diagnosed, but not with a lot of hope. When they told me, I said, well, is there a cure? Well, no, there's no cure. I mean, it was just like, you have to work at it. And now I know how you really do have to work at it. I mean, I do know that. I've known that for years, but it wasn't very hopeful back in 97. And then they put me on the anafranil, which gave me all kinds of problems. But I had a very good doctor at that time, and she moved out of state after 2 years. So it was devastating. I cried when she told me she was leaving. And then I had another person, and the next 3 were good. They understood OCD, but they didn't do the ERP with me, or the charting, or the supporting of that. We didn't have, they talked, it was talk therapy. But they understood, but they didn't put it into action. So finally, after the conference in Austin, Texas, in 2019, I came home and I said, I got to let go of this therapist and I got to find somebody. And I just went on the phone and I kept calling people and asking them, do they do ERP, and tell me what it is. Because I don't want to just sit and talk about it. That wasn't getting me anywhere. It gave me a better understanding, but I needed someone to work with me on what I had to do. And so if I had to go and, face a situation like, someone was killed on and I hope I'm not triggering anybody, on a bridge near us, I wouldn't go over that bridge, or if I went over the bridge, I'd make sure I had serene thoughts, and it was painful. And that was a bridge that I had to take to work. So for about 10 years, I was struggling with that bridge. Now this spring, I was able to go to that bridge, and I went there and I walked over it and I drove over it and I went under it, because they have a path under there facing it. And now I'm starting to face more of what I had to do. So Ethan, these therapists knew about it, but they didn't know, they didn't do the work.
So let me ask you a question.
The keeping track of your suds
Sure.
and all that.
So after all of these years of frustration, and where did the hope and motivation to go leave the conference and find treatment and do it, where did that come from?
Well, I realized that I'm not getting the actual ERP, the work, doing the Y box before my therapist finally tells me, okay, these are things that we need to work on. And so what was the question?
Where did your after
when
all
did
of
I
those
start
years
to
of
gain hope again?
No, well, what motivated you to get better after all of those years of the wrong therapy and not getting better? What was, yeah.
Well, I never really lost hope. I felt I had a job. I got married. I was like, things were moving. I worked through it. Like, parts of me had to work around the OCD. I had the checking I would do later on, or I would do it very discreetly, or I would do it and say, I have to do, check the weather. So I'd be looking outside, making sure everything's okay. That's how I did it. I would work around it, if you know what I mean. Like I hid knives because I didn't want to see them. They were like, oh gosh, they use those, in scary movies. And my friend kept buying. She said, where are your knives? She keeps buying me new ones. I had to keep hiding them because she said, you don't have any here. And I said, oh, that's okay. I don't need, we pull them out when we need them. That's where they were, in the drawers.
So what made you decide to stop negotiating with OCD?
I worked around it. What others? Okay. I'm getting older. Life is too precious. I spent a lot of time. I had a pretty okay life, but this OCD, I was just hanging over the cesspool, most of my life. And now I said, I don't want that anymore. And now my daughter getting older, and I want to be able to travel and be with her and do things and not worry about, oh, it's a little too far out of my comfort zone. So that's where as I got older and I had more time, I wasn't working anymore. I love that. That was another thing I had time to devote to the work that ERP takes.
Absolutely. So, I mean, basically your values.
What did you say?
No, you identify, I think we're having a connection issue, but your values became more important than the OCD.
Yeah,
and so you were willing to do. Absolutely. Valerie, for you, right. I think you were really struggling when you found, what were some of the barriers for you and what pushed you through to get treatment?
Well, I think one of the biggest barriers was not having any knowledge and had no idea what was going on, going back to thinking it was menopause, or culturally, we keep so much inside. We live in our culture sometimes where I didn't have the, I even want to say the ability to think beyond the limitations of, keep everything to yourself, you're a superwoman and all those things. And I think what was the turning point for me, after I kind of got the diagnosis and went through all of the, I won't say grief, because I don't even remember if I was excited that I found out that I had OCD, or, was it just, oh, okay? I really don't remember. But I think after I went to the conference in 2017, and I felt so good at the conference, all of these resources that I didn't have before. I didn't even know what OCD was. And, all these other people that had the same disorder. I was so excited. And then, as you know, like I said, but there was people, older women, Black people that were missing. And that kind of was the catalyst for me, even though during that time, I had yet reached my bottom, because even after the conference, things got a little worse. I went through that big dip period. But I think that was kind of it. I knew that there was hope, and I knew that nobody could do it for me. I think that's one thing I learned after years of struggling, is very much a personal walk in a lot of ways. I remember, bottom line for me, which it was having a good therapist who you challenged me to, Ethan, at the 2017 convention. I went complaining to Ethan, and bottom line, Ethan challenged me, and he was like, okay, so what are you willing to do about it? And to be honest, I was like, well, whatever I need to do, And so it was just that kind of energy, and somebody took an interest. But it was the lack of not seeing enough help or enough knowledge. And so much for me, because like I said, I had no idea, none. Mental illness was not on my timeline or in my thought patterns, and certainly not OCD, because I had all the stereotypes, that I didn't wash my hands, I'm not a super, neat person, and all of those things. And so when I finally got the diagnosis, for me, I'm so grateful for the therapist that I ended up with. And that therapist who was actually treating me, I went to go see her because of the general anxiety disorder. My therapist sent me to her group on Wednesday nights, for the general anxiety. And like I said, I've always been a talker, if you can't tell. And she noticed it.
And we're out of time.
Yeah. She was the first one to recognize it. And I had been going there maybe 6, 7, 8 months. I mean, every Wednesday night, like clockwork. And she pulled me aside. And I remember she told me, that's why I always say for my story, I believe she was God sent. She pulled me aside and she said, I've never ever done this. And please keep it between us, because I don't want my other patients to think I'm playing favoritism. But I think you have OCD. And she said, but I'm not a specialist. So I'm going to, refer you. I'm going to tell your doctor to refer you to a specialist. And that was the biggest hurdle for me, finding the right care, finding the right treatment, and all those factors, kind of help with all those barriers. So that was the lack of knowledge was my biggest hurdle.
Thank you, Val. I appreciate it. And that's probably true for anyone at a certain point. I want to encourage everyone who's viewing to please ask questions if you have them. We'll definitely answer them. We're about to get to questions in just a few minutes. Well, first of all, Carly, do you have anything to add to the current conversation before I throw one more question at you?
No, I think Betsy and Valerie have had some great insights on some of those challenges. But I guess I want to really applaud their determination in persevering through that system.
Oh, thank you.
These are really long periods of time, and does really highlight that hopefulness that both of you had, that life could be better and life could be different.
And one more point on that, Ethan, too. My therapist, my OCD therapist, asked me where did I want to be in 20 years. And I knew, I'm almost felt emotional at the moment. And I knew that I couldn't be where I was today. And I knew that it was on me to do it. You have the tools and all those things, but basically it's your commitment to yourself and your need to, go over those hurdles. But for me, going back to the topic of being an older adult, it was like I don't have any time to waste. Because I've wasted all those years. And I remember when she asked me, my first response was, well, I hope I'm alive. Because being older, all those things come into play. And I think that has helped a lot with pushing me forward and being transparent and all those things, because I know most of my life is behind me. And so, but it was important. That question got me thinking, you want to do 20 more years of this? It was like, no way. I didn't want to do 20 minutes more. And that was the catalyst for me.
Carly, is there a pattern, or I should say the frequency of the adults that you work with or going to work with, and maybe this is what you're going to study, but what is the general mindset when an older adult seeks treatment? For instance, Betsy's mindset of I still have hope. I still think I can get better, and here's what I want to do. Versus there's no way. I've been dealing with this for 60 years. I haven't gotten better. Whether they've done the right treatment or not, I've been dealing with this for 60 years. There's no way I'm going to get better. What do you generally see more of, and then how do you overcome?
Look, we certainly see both. And again, because a lot of the clinical work that we do is as a part of research and clinical trials, we get lots of people who come into our clinical trials who have absolutely no expectation that treatment will help, have no hope that things can be different for them. And they often will come in order to try and help us. And so it's a very altruistic motive. I want to try and help other people. I want to try and help the researchers, but I don't think this will be helpful for me. And it actually doesn't matter. So those people who come in, really energetic and really hopeful, and those people who don't, wherever people are at, we can work with that, and we can kind of shift some of those attitudes and get people on board. And people are often really blown away at the changes that they can make in their life. And we get lots of people at the end of the treatment saying, I was very skeptical this was going to work for me. I only came because my husband or my wife or my doctor told me to. And actually, this has been really, really life-changing. But one of the stories I think that both Betsy and Valerie were talking about this idea of being mindful about that time left in your life and the quality of that.
Yes.
It's we have really lovely research in older adulthood. So I guess I was talking earlier about we really see the prevalence rates of mental health disorders decline in older adulthood. And there's some great research actually saying that older adults show something that we call the positivity effect or the positivity bias, where they actually tend to pay attention to positive information more so than negative information. And one of the reasons we think that happens is that as you get older, you become a bit more mindful about the time left that you have, and you start really reevaluating your priorities. That when you're in kind of your early adult life, it makes sense to be quite focused on perhaps the threats or the negative things. You need to be mindful with your money. You need to think, about all the potential risks to your family and things like that. And there's potentially an evolutionary, advantage to being focused on the negative. Whereas as you get older, there really isn't an evolutionary advantage to focusing on being emotionally content and not suffering. And so we see actually that there are older adults often have this great wisdom from a life lived, and you've overcome often a range of different challenges and hurdles in your lifetime, and you've learned great emotion regulation skills, you've been wisdom. But there's also this very normative age shift in terms of the types of information that you pay attention to and what your goals are. It's no longer necessarily about wealth and fame and career success. It is about being emotionally content. And so it's a really nice transition. It was interesting that both of you mentioned that awareness of that timeline and that real shifting of priorities and goals about how you want to spend that time.
I love that. So, Betsy, did you have thoughts on that before we jump to questions?
Any thoughts on, what did you say?
Just on what, it looked like you had something to say on what Carly was saying, so I just wanted to check.
Ethan?
Can you hear me okay?
No, I do. Yes, I do now.
Okay.
You keep freezing there. But when she was saying about as we get older, yeah, you do start weeding out the negative and the things that aren't important, and you do focus. I think as I get older, that's what I'm doing, and I focus on the emotional and the quality of time. Yes. Okay, that's all. I was just
No, that's great. I just wanted to check in with you because you looked like you had something to say. So let's jump to questions and dive into this. Actually, the first one's for you. I'm not sure if he's seeking reassurance, but I will give him the benefit of the doubt because it's always good to know if meet people that have similar. So this one's for Betsy. Paul asked at 7:14 p.m. Paul asked Betsy, have you ever experienced the compulsion of rereading, rewriting, rechecking work at some point in your life?
Yes, I did. I used to reread before I turned the page. Yep. And I don't do that anymore. I've just decided that, I got to find out what happened, and you just keep going. You just push yourself. It doesn't feel comfortable because when you do that, you still feel like you want to go back. And did I do this? Whatever that thought was, no, just keep going. That was a while ago that I had that.
That makes sense. Go ahead, Val.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I experienced that. It's still a challenge. Today, I have to have like a conscious awareness of it, especially like in my family, they hate to go to dinner with me because of the menu. If there's too many options, everybody else will be waiting on me to order. And I realize that I'm reading over and over and over and over again. So it has to be a conscious thing with me now. In the beginning, people would actually get mad. I mean, like, we still waiting? And I would just pick something. But now I'm more conscious and I go, okay, I'm going to look at it no more than 2 times and pick something. But yes, I do that all the time.
So Paul, and I have too. So Paul, you're definitely not alone. I always like to say, Paul, you are special. Your OCD is unfortunately not. So I just had this.
And I just want to say something with rewriting. I don't rewrite, but I wouldn't use black ink because, black ink represents death or black clothing. So I wouldn't wear black clothing for the longest time. And I like it. And this is really, I've had to put all my blue pens aside now. And then
That's
when
awesome.
I was in Japan, the white carnation, resembled or was used when someone passed away, the white flower. So I didn't switch to white. I kept wearing white. So
I think we can all agree that OCD is extremely creative. And so are we by default. Shelley wrote at 7:30, she said, my family just described me as an insecure and fearful person growing up, yet I wasn't diagnosed with severe OCD till I was 47. And I think this is so many of our stories. I know that I was described as odd, creative, just different, 6, 7, 8 years old. And I wasn't, and so I think we can all relate. And I'm sorry for that, Shelley, but I think that's so many of our journeys as well. And something that hopefully, we will continue to address. Lori wrote, even at that age, I knew it wasn't normal and started hiding it. It was probably whatever age we were talking about at that time. Nancy wrote, is there a way to share more information about Dr. Johnco's study? I have a feeling that Fran will post links to your study. So look at.
I'm very, very happy. I think Fran has a copy of the flyer and she's going to post it up. And actually, potentially, the postdoc who's working on this study with me, Dr. Ron Smith, is online today. So feel free to join in on the chat, Ron, if you're there. But yeah, I guess if there is anyone listening out there who is over the age of 65 who has experiences of OCD or who has a loved one in that age group with OCD, we're really eager to get in touch with you. The research in this area is so limited. It's primarily relying on single case studies or a couple of case series of people coming together. So we've been so fortunate to have funding from the IOCDF to do one of the largest studies to date, looking at trying to understand the experience of older adults with OCD. And a really novel aspect is also understanding the impact and the involvement of your loved ones. So whether that's a spouse or an adult child or a close friend. But certainly what we see in kids and in adults is that other people often end up very much entwined in your OCD symptoms, in that idea of accommodation. So whether you're seeking reassurance from them, whether you're asking them to participate or facilitate compulsive behaviours, they can be, really integral in terms of maintaining OCD symptoms in younger people. And we know that higher levels of accommodation actually negatively impacts ERP outcomes. And one of the things that I think makes it so relevant to have a look at the idea of family members or supporters' involvement in OCD for older adults is that it's really important to distinguish appropriate functional support. There are people, who for changes in physical or cognitive reasons might not be able to drive or might not be able to do all the things around the house. So appropriate functional support is okay, but trying to delineate where is appropriate functional support and what is accommodation. And it might even be, after an injury or an illness, that a family member steps in, and then as you regain and become well again, do they step out to an appropriate way? So we're really interested in understanding the experience of individuals who have OCD, as well as that involvement of their loved ones and supporters, and both in a functional and in a problematic type of way.
When you say individuals with OCD, I just want to clarify. So these are individuals that have been untreated or successfully, go ahead.
Probably people who still have some symptoms. So they could be people who are in treatment, or people who are just have some residual symptoms, or people who are untreated. We're not fussy. Where again, there's such limited research in this area. We want to understand better. We want to try and experiences like this are wonderful, and I feel very privileged to be involved in town halls and webinars like this, and Betsy and Valerie for you sharing your story. It's a really courageous thing to do, and Ethan as well, you as well, but you're very, very young for my interests.
I'll take that as flattery.
So really trying to understand people's experiences so that it can help us develop better treatments. Should we just be taking the treatments that we do? Oh, sorry, fell down. Should we just be taking the same stock standard ERP treatment that we're doing with a 30-year-old and applying it to a 70-year-old? Or are there ways that we need to consider unique factors to older adults? Or is it important for us to think about how we involve their loved ones or their supporters in a better way? So yes, no, I would love for anyone who's listening or would like to support us in that effort to reach out. And I think Fran will share a flyer about the email address and the phone number that you can get in touch with us. We are in Australia, so we'll be working around time zones.
Well, thank you. I think he did, and I know there's a lot. Some people are actually upset that they're not old enough. But thank you for sharing. Bonnie asked a question. I'm not going to have Fran post it because it's going to cover everybody, but I think we should all weigh in on it. It's from Bonnie Lentz. It does cut off. Unfortunately, StreamYard cuts off comments that are of after a certain length, but I think we can get the gist of it. So Bonnie wrote, "I've had OCD as long as I can remember, symptoms as far back as preschool years. I fought it for years, unwilling to accept that I needed help. Finally started to get help at age 50 when I didn't want to live that way anymore, and studied my symptoms to diagnose myself. The fear of being discovered made therapist visits excruciating for the first few years. Besides these town halls, which are great, are there any outreach, awareness, stigma-reducing programs in specific communities?" And it's kind of where it goes off. But I think what she's asking for is support, support. And Valerie, I mean, I'll start with you because it's so much of your story in terms of, go ahead. I'll let you take it. Nobody wants to hear from me.
Well, yeah. I certainly can relate because that was my one reason I conceived or had the conception of Miss Mabel's Farrell's nonprofit, because there aren't many places for older people to find support. I know for me, even just trying to Google, I used to Google Black women or women over 50, OCD support groups, and nothing would pop up, or something totally off the wall would pop up. So I certainly understand, the need for that, but always go, like I said, it's not our size, but it's the service of what we can do to help someone along the way. And get involved if you can, even if she wants to maybe start a support group herself, or or she can log on to my website. But it's definitely a need, and I'm kind of getting like Betsy now. What was the question?
I mean, the question was that
age.
she's had it since 6 and finally willing to get help at 50, but has found the idea of going to therapists and being discovered and finding out about, her whole life was all the things that accompany the stigma, is very difficult. So ways in which she can get support and awareness, stigma reducing programs to maybe help her with the anxiety around and stigma that she's facing herself around going to seek treatment after so long.
Oh, yes, because I remember when I first went to go to the therapist the very first time, I remember feeling so shameful and wishing I had, sunglasses and who's going to see me. And then it dawned on me that I'm so worried about who's going to see me, where I should be concerned about me getting better. And so it took some time. It was nothing that happened overnight. I think it just came with the constant pushing forward and looking for resources and reading. I got a lot of encouragement from reading other people's works, their personal stories. It was kind of like invisible hope. If they can do it, so can I. But it's definitely is going to be a challenge, I think, especially when you have lived so long without knowing where to go or what to do to take that next step. But the best thing is, like you say, going to a website or, contacting us, the International OCD Foundation, all those resources she's going to have to kind of dig for, but they're there. If not, create your own.
Yeah, and maybe the no CD, isn't that
yes.
on? Yeah, and Kimberly Quinlan has something at her CBT school, or I mean, a lot of those are online that she could start, or some of John Hirschfeld's books.
I think those are all great suggestions, Betsy, and I can give you the specifics of what she's talking about. Go ahead, Carly.
Ethan, you might be able to correct me a bit more in the US context, but I think one of the real silver linings to come out of COVID is the availability of telehealth. And it's really shifted the way that people are able to access mental health treatment. And so while I would encourage you to, at some point, engage in that exposure task of actually walking through the front door of an office, if that's feeling like too big a step right now, it would be worth trying to reach out to a clinician or things like that and seeing if there's an option to start with telehealth where you can do a consult from your own home, to really just start that process. It gives you a chance to see whether you connect with a therapist and work up to actually going to an in-person appointment. But COVID has certainly rapidly pushed a transition of availability to specialist mental health clinicians that previously would have been really out of reach or would have required traveling great distances to be able to do that remotely. So this is actually a great time for easing into treatment in a way that might feel a bit more manageable for you.
I have a question for you, Carly, based on that. Before that, I kind of want to summarize what everybody talked about, so we can hopefully, Bonnie, give you some specific support. So first of all, Betsy listed some really great support. One of them is an app called NoCD. It's an OCD community. It's not just an app. It's available in the App Store and Google Play. It's not only tools to do ERPs, but it's a massive community of 200,000 members. It's actually the largest OCD community in the world, and they have a massive group chat feature where there's people all the time talking about different subjects, subtypes, things like that. So there's a massive community there. She also mentioned Kimberly Quinlan, a fellow Australian, who is one of my favorite people. She's an incredible advocate. She's also a licensed clinician. And if you go to her Instagram at Kimberly Quinlan, she is constantly posting really, really good content on self-compassion, on gratitude, on granting yourself grace, and really how you access treatment. Also, Betsy, she runs a Facebook group. Her website is cbtschool.com, but she also runs a CBT School Facebook group, which you can also join. And then lastly, Betsy mentioned some John Hirschfield books. Also, one that we always like to recommend is Jonathan Grayson's Freedom from OCD. It's a brilliant book. I think it's one of the best books out there for OCD, for self-help. So recommend that. And finally, to Carly's point, yes, everything is more accessible than ever before. So now if you don't live near that major city, you can access treatment. So the only thing I would add, Bonnie, is if you are in the States, you would need to contact a therapist that is in your state. So they're licensed in your state. But beyond that, they don't need to be near you or in the city you're in. And so I think that's a great idea as well. Treatment is probably more accessible in terms of geography than ever before. Here's the devil's advocate question, Carly. Based on what you're doing, is if we know that there's a pretty big discrepancy between age and technology as people get older and the difficulty managing technology. Do you see this as a problem moving forward?
Actually, I think moving forward, it's a massive advantage because it's very much changing. Again, my statistics are based in Australia, but the last survey that was done by our e-safety commissioner suggested that 90% of people over the age of 50 now had access to at least one internet-enabled device. And so we're actually running another clinical trial for older adults with anxiety and depressive disorders, where we've developed one of the first online internet-delivered treatment programs for older adults. And we've had a lot of people laugh at us and say, well, older people can't use the internet. And it's just not true. It's really shifting. And particularly, we've got the baby boomer cohort now coming in, and they've been very technologically proficient and savvy. They've used that routinely in their work life. But even older people, people who are older than that generation there are a proportion and a growing proportion that are familiar with using the internet or streaming services. And COVID has actually pushed a lot of people who might have been a bit resistant initially to try it out, to try and learn. We're about to publish some data on the impact of COVID on older people and older people's mental health. And we've been finding that there's been quite significant proportions of people who are using new technology for the first time because of lockdowns. And so I think, we've got to be really mindful about these ageist beliefs and these ageist stereotypes that we've got about, older people can't use technology, because it's just not true. They can. They might need some support in the initial phases. They might need some practice, but they can use it. And there are certainly a lot of people who are willing to use it as well. I can't see us going backwards from this. I think this has fundamentally changed the way that we deliver mental health treatment now. And I think that telehealth will have to become a part of the suite of different types of treatment options available for people. That, they can be, app-based or web-based things, that we can do video conferencing, there can be internet-delivered programs, there can be, therapy delivered via the telephone and emailing or posting out resources or tracking sheets. I think it really was a huge struggle and a huge push for the mental health profession to be thrown in the deep end of how you shift everything digitally. But I think it's been a wonderful transition, and it's really going to change these barriers that we've had about geographical access, and certainly for people in rural and regional locations who've historically had to travel or receive inadequate treatment. I can't see us going backwards in this. So yeah, I'm very mindful about ruling out older people and being able to access technology, internet delivered or technology based treatment services.
No, I wasn't really.
The fact that this person is asking this question online would already make me think they've navigated Facebook or YouTube or one of the platforms, and those are exponentially harder than clicking a link from an email to get on Zoom or whatever platform a clinician is using. So I've got a lot of faith that they would be able to give it a go.
Actually, it was my question, but I was representing the ageist population, and I'm simply the messenger in that question. But
you're not alone in that attitude, and I think the reaction to our internet delivered treatment. I mean, we co-designed that with older people, and they were so engaged. We had older adults who were experiencing anxiety or depressive problems, and also people who weren't. And a lot of our kind of consumer engagement committee have requested ongoing access to the program just because they've loved it and have loved being able to access resources online from home and re-listen to us delivering that content over time.
Necessity is the mother of invention. So, when it's necessary. Bonnie, I just want to add, I completely forgot about NoCD. I forgot to even explain what their sweet spot was, which is they offer virtual teletherapy. It's a fraction of the cost of regular therapists. It's also covered by insurance in some states, which is quite amazing. I think they're live in 23 or 26 states right now. I'm not sure, if they're live in your state, but they will give you, if they are live in your state, you can get a 15-minute free phone consultation to see if their 2-month program is good for you, and then go from there. So I completely forgot to mention that, and apologies on that. Thank you, Carly, for that answer. That's really, I appreciate that. So Barbara wrote, it would be so helpful if therapists don't understand OCD would refer us to those that can really help instead of trying to deal with it without success. And, we call that detect and refer, but I'll let Carly speak to that. What's interesting is, as much as I can't stand the 10 therapists that I went to prior that didn't help me and just did talk therapy, I don't know that any one of them didn't know that they couldn't treat OCD. I think all of them actually believed that they could treat OCD. And none of them were trying to, be malicious. Carly, as an expert, is this an education issue? Like, are we missing the mark when you're getting your master's and your PhD at not addressing this, at an education level, or where are you seeing this as a problem, and how can we?
Oh, that's a big question. I agree with you that, I think it's very unlikely that any therapist would intentionally not give you good treatment. But therapists are people too, and they will have different attitudes. And there's a huge amount of research out there trying to understand why therapists don't do ERP. And there are some who are not trained in it. There is variability, and I think actually much more significant variability in training programs in the US, given the volume of different rules in different states and things like that. So there's quite significant differences in the training programs and differences in the types of internships and placements and things that clinicians will be part of. But even amongst appropriately trained clinicians, there are a sizable proportion of clinicians who don't deliver ERP, particularly, or any kind of exposure-based treatments, even for anxiety disorders. And it's a huge problem. And so there is a lot of research trying to understand why and what we can do to overcome that. And a lot of the time it's to do with clinicians' beliefs. And oftentimes they will have beliefs that ERP is too aversive, that clients won't be able to handle it, that they will become too distressed, or that they will drop out of treatment because it's too confronting. And there are meta-analyses published that show that's not the case. So in the randomized control trials, we don't see this much higher level of dropout from ERP than we do from other therapies. And given we know it's the most effective treatment, that really should start dispelling some of those clinician myths. And a lot of times it also comes down to therapists' confidence. If they haven't done exposure-based treatments before, they're often a bit scared about it, and they're a bit scared about those potential outcomes. So while I don't think that those people ever do it maliciously, and I think that people delivering non-evidence-based or non-first-line types of treatments do genuinely hope that helps and do want to support people, it is a little bit of a it's a really important thing when you are choosing a therapist to ask them what type of treatment they deliver and what that involves. Because again, you will have a lot of therapists who say, I do CBT, but they don't do the exposure bit. Or they do a ERP, but they do a non-ERP version of it.
You're right. You're right.
So just using those buzzwords isn't sufficient. So I do think as a client, when you're shopping for the right therapist for yourself, it's important to ask those key questions. You are interviewing them to see if they are going to be worth your time and your money and your investment.
Go ahead, Betsy.
Ask them what they can offer you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carly.
Well, I was thinking when you said that, Carly, that one of, not this therapist that I'm seeing, but the one before that said to me, like after 2 years of being with her, I'm like, oh, when are we going to do some of the work? She's, I don't do that paperwork. It's just too much to keep track of everything. And, you know, that's part of keeping track of what you're doing and seeing your progress, and seeing your progress is so important. I even have a list in my bathroom of the things that I've accomplished. And, you know, it's just, I'm very visual too. So I know that I need to see these things, but you can see your progress and you don't skip any then because you have it right there. And she doesn't forget any, and, or, you know, but she actually said it's just too much to keep track of. And that's when I knew that was not a good fit. It was a little bit too late, but it's okay. I moved on.
Go ahead, Val.
And I was going to say for me, if I didn't know, how would I be able to ask them the correct questions? And so I think once I have the tools and once you have the more knowledge and even maybe the diagnosis, then you're more apt to be able to say, well, should we be doing this or that or whatever? And I know my first therapist that I spent, like I said, the 2 years with her, I wouldn't say she was wrong. She just wasn't right for me. And it took a little while to come to that conclusion because you don't know. You know, I didn't know. I spent almost a year trying to work on the phobia why I didn't fly. You know, but I had OCD and didn't know it. So I didn't know what questions to ask her. So I've learned we do have we have to be our own self-advocate sometimes and not be afraid. And going back to one of the questions, I think it was Bonnie, and I meant to say too, I learned to celebrate even the thought of thinking, oh, okay, maybe I should ask this question. Because, you know, if you keep giving yourself some self love and encourage, you can get a little farther sometimes down the road. But it all goes back to, like you say, having a little knowledge and tuning into programs like this, and you know, seeking out your own resources. Because I didn't realize the information is out there. It might be hard to find, but I was at a disadvantage because I didn't know what to look for. And so, you know, like they say, hindsight is 20/20. So now that I know, and it goes back to what I was saying about even it's not size, it's the service. Even being able to offer a person that little bit of information, you know, it's a service that they can take and use it to their ability and, you know, hopefully get on the right path. But be your own self-advocate, I should say, don't be afraid to be your own self-advocate.
Thank you, Valerie. It's definitely a two-way street. And I think that, you know, the IOCDF works hard through their BTTI to train individuals, you know, in ERP. It's also, you know, when you're at your bottom or in the depths of hell and you're struggling, you know, you barely want to live, let alone have enough of the confidence to be able to grill a therapist, you know. And I'm not saying you should be, I completely agree, you should be your own advocate, but it's also really hard because you're, so with that, there's a great article that I always refer on the IOCDF. Fran will find the link and post it. It's a list of questions that if you are looking for a therapist, you should absolutely ask them to make sure you find the right person. And lastly, I just believe in, if you don't want to treat, and this probably goes to Barbara's statement, if you don't want to treat OCD, at least know what the right treatment is and then be able to refer. So it's like, if you're a therapist and you want to do any other kind of treatment, no. But if you come across somebody with OCD, it's like, oh, well, I don't do this, but this is what you should look for. And how can I help you find that person? So, so all that, of course, Carly.
That being your own advocate and questioning a health professional is often something that older adults feel very uncomfortable doing. This is, again, older adults have grown up in a generation where doctors are often revered, and they have all the answers. And we get this with physical health problems as well. Why are you on all these medications? Well, I don't know. My doctor told me to. And that idea of being assertive or questioning someone in authority is often something that older adults really struggle with, and it's very new to them. But unfortunately, it is something that is very necessary in order to find the right type of therapist, or at least having those conversations with your referring physician.
So thank you, Carly. So someone asks at 7:43 p.m. He calls me Yank. He's the only person I like that calls me Yank. He's also in Australia. The Australia contingency has turned out to see Carly. You folks think it's harder for treatment the older you are diagnosed, and is there a point where medication is too late regardless due to age? Because that is what myself and others were told by the experts. So let's digest that a little bit, and I'll throw that out to anybody.
Oh, I'm going to say no outright to pretty much all of the content in that question. No, you are never too late to benefit from treatment. I think, as I said last time, I've worked with people in their hundreds. I think the oldest person I've worked with was 113. And so, you are certainly, there is not an age where we deem you too old to work with. And so you definitely can still benefit from treatment. And there's actually a little bit of evidence coming out of England. So the Improving Access to Psychological Therapies scheme in England requires everyone comes through their public mental health system, and they collect routine outcome data on people. And there is actually some research coming out of England that suggests that older adults actually do slightly better in treatment than younger adults. And as a clinician, we certainly see that. Older adults are often really reliable clients. They come to sessions. They show up 15 minutes early to their appointments. They do their homework.
I'm 90 at heart, so that makes sense.
They're often really diligent clients. They take the skills on board. They practice it. Maybe to your point earlier, Betsy, maybe there's a bit of extra time, or there's a different motivation about how you want to spend the time that you've got left. But no, certainly in response to that question, there is no age where we deem treatment to be ineffective. We don't have great treatment in terms of treatment outcomes for older people specifically, but when we look across anxiety and depression and all of the literature on treatment of mental health problems in older people, we find at least similar outcomes than we do for younger people, and in some studies slightly better as well. So, and I know those experts are very wrong.
Thank you, Carly. And I know Valerie has some thoughts. I just quickly want to say, I know that we throw out a lot, and I'm guilty of it too. We throw out a lot that, the longer you've been suffering and struggling, the harder treatment will be, down the road. And yes, kids are generally pretty easy to treat because their minds are still malleable. But the reality is, and Reed Wilson says this best, he has patients all the time that come in with extremely horrendous OCD, and they do really, really well really quickly. And he has patients that come in with pretty mild OCD, and they do terrible with the treatment. So, really the severity of your diagnosis has little to do with the effective treatment. So it's definitely worth a go for what it's worth. Just because you've struggled with it a long time doesn't mean that treatment will be ineffective. Go ahead, Val.
Well, I was going to say, I think that was part of the hurdle I needed to get over too, because the longer you live, the more life experiences you have. So you're constantly, if you're not being treated, you're constantly adding, another experience, another, low hill or valley that you're in. So you're constantly adding all of these experiences, and it makes it feel like, well, nothing's going to change. So it was, for me personally, it was something that I had to really allow myself to say, I'm worth it. There is hope. It's never too late. And I almost got to the point where it was like, okay, well, what else? How could it hurt? But I think it's just simply because we're living longer, or we're in a different stage of our life, and we have more experiences that might be negative when it comes to being an OCD sufferer, that can block us from thinking we can get better, which is not true.
I also think, Betsy, you're a beautiful example of this. I know for me that when I found the right treatment, I was so angry from going to the wrong treatment that I really got my own way for a year and made my life way harder than it had to be, because I was so had lack of hope and so angry. But you're a beautiful example of, despite you going through various treatments throughout, you finally just made a decision that that's what you wanted to do and did it.
Yeah. I have to do it. And I felt this spring, now I know there's this word neuroplasticity and how that affects, but I really felt when I didn't do a certain compulsion, I thought, it's not bothering me. I can go to the next step and try the next thing. And that phrase, lean into, has meant so much to me in the last couple months, because now I'm not as so hesitant to lean into. And I think there's something going on up there with that idea of neuroplasticity. And it's a relief. I'm not done yet. I have a lot of work to do, but I feel a difference.
Go ahead, Carly.
Yeah.
My PhD was on that exact topic about, can you teach specific therapy skills to older adults? And I went to publish one of the papers out of it, and the title of it was called "You Can Teach an Old Dog New Tricks." And the reviewer got outraged that it was a highly offensive title, so it's called something very boring and lame now. But I do know that there's a couple of people who obviously reviewed that paper in the peer review process who cite that work in their training programs for clinicians coming through. And that, we certainly found that you could teach specific therapy skills to older adults, and that's been a real shift in the way that we've thought about some of those, particularly cognitive therapy skills, and whether older adults are flexible enough in terms of their ability to take that on board. You certainly can.
Thank you, Carly. I appreciate that. I was looking for, sorry, apologies. I was looking for, I lost the question because they adjust. There we are. Okay. So Lori wrote, my dad is 82. He's known I've had OCD for years. About a year ago, I was trying to explain to him. He said, so it's really a real thing, which is, again, it's very complicated, because we don't only have, we've talked about it, this is obvious, but we don't only have the hurdle of the mental illness to get over, but we have the stigma of the mental illness to get over. And, and Valerie will tell you, and she really educated me. I was completely naive to it, but the double stigma of being a person of color on top of that, and everything that she's had to face in regards to, and I remember my first conversation with Valerie, and she was telling me, about her community and things that she faced. And I literally had no idea. I hung up the phone and I cried, because I was really upset that anybody should have to go through. Yeah. Thanks for making me cry, Val. But no, I mean, there's a lot of crap to go through, but that's why we all do what we do. And Carly does what she does. And, we're all working to, hopefully Carly will put herself out of business at some point, and, everybody will be diagnosed, when they get, and I always say it's like, going to a doctor for a foot problem and taking 17 years to find a podiatrist. It doesn't make any sense, So, Nancy wrote, I did get treatment in my 20s, as I've said before in other town halls, and I had a few years of better functioning. I've gradually declined and trying to get better, harder now. Sorry to hear that, Nancy. OCD was, Shelley wrote, OCD was not talked about or heard by our parents in our generation, referring to the 82-year-old father. Which, to Carly's statements about earlier, being hospitalized and sort of where it's all come from. going to skip down to some questions down here. Actually, Selwyn wrote, Dr. Carly, if I may, where would you direct Australians to go for local info or help?
In terms of seeking treatment to access a clinician, I would recommend seeing your general practitioner. So actually, we've had a huge development in Australia this week that our federal government has just doubled the number of sessions that Australians can get Medicare rebates on, from 10 to 20 sessions per year, which is particularly relevant for OCD. So trying to treat OCD in 10 sessions is very hard. And so this has actually been a really huge shift in the mental health field in Australia. So yeah, I would encourage him to go and talk to his GP and get on board. There's actually a group of OCD researchers and clinicians in Australia, and we've been forming a consortium recently. So hopefully we will continue to move forward with that, and we will be able to develop a national website that will help link people in. But the first point of call to accessing a treatment would be to go and see your GP and try and access a mental health care plan. And as I said, you can actually get up to 20 sessions per calendar year available now with a substantial Medicare rebate.
Thank you, Carly. We have just time for one more. This is a good question to ask everybody. I also encourage everyone to go through the comments. Fran has done an incredible job keeping up with screaming. No, it's okay. It's okay. Don't get don't get violent, Valerie.
No. Go. Sorry about that.
No problem at all. He's done a great job of keeping up with all of us liking to talk. And so there's tons of great resources, websites, all the stuff that we've mentioned is listed in the thread. So please go back. I will end on this question. Shelley Richardson Hone wrote, so is OCD, this is at 8:20 p.m., Fran. So is OCD symptoms more ingrained in our brain, and is it harder to retrain our brains? I know that you touched on this a little bit, Carly, but is there some truth to the longer you've lived with reassuring and enabling and reinforcing the OCD thoughts, is it harder to undo?
There's research that says the severity, that the OCD severity can predict outcome, but it's a really kind of, I don't know, it's a very benign statistical procedure. If you start here and you go, if you have two people, I don't know how to do this now because I'm in different directions now on the screen. If you have two different people, one with more severe symptoms and one here, and they both decline, one is the one who started decline. They could decline at exactly the same rate, but the one who started more severe is going to end up more severe at that point in time. So it might just mean, and so that's what we see in terms of the predictors, that people with more severe outcomes tend to be a bit more severe at the end, but it doesn't necessarily, but we don't have any research saying that their rate of change will be different. It might just be that they might need a little bit more treatment. And we certainly don't have great research that says a longer period of symptoms changes your treatment outcome. So as you were describing before, Ethan, people can have very varied responses to treatment, that some people with mild symptoms can really struggle to overcome them, and some people with very severe symptoms can have quite a rapid response, or a very sort of average response to treatment. So the length of symptom severity certainly shouldn't be a barrier to accessing treatment. It will just be part of tracking that treatment progress and seeing when you need more and when you're done.
And I think our OCD is very good at coming up with questions like that to maybe psych ourselves out from seeking treatment or thinking. I think if anything we take away from this town hall, it's that Betsy and Valerie, and we're plenty ingrained, we're plenty reassured, we're plenty enabled, and Betsy is making great strides, and Valerie is continuing to make great strides and manage. I want to end with both of you. Give us some final thoughts. What is a message that you would like to leave everybody that's watching? Betsy, I'll start with you.
Okay, I just really want to emphasize what Val said, in that it's up to you to do it. You can have all the support and people could tell you and all the programming on, but it takes you to take that step and keep going and not go back, and just it's on you. We have people cheering for us, and we have doctors giving us suggestions, which we need, but it's up to us to really believe in ourselves. So thanks.
I love that. Thank you, Betsy. And thank you for being here and sharing your story with us. I appreciate it. Val, same question.
Oh, hi, Shelley. From the last question, we're friends now. I think I would like to leave with there's always hope, because we're still here. And it goes back to what I was saying, think about where you want to be tomorrow, celebrate every thought, every step you take, and don't be afraid of failure. Uh, because that's even in failure, there's progress. You learn from your own mistakes, and always to think of the fable, the tortoise and the hare. One went fast, one went slow, but they both crossed the finish line.
Right.
So stay encouraged.
I love
That's
that, Valerie.
good.
Thank you, and of course, thank you, Carly, for joining us on a Thursday morning from down under to give us your expertise. Also, to piggyback on Carly some more, Fran also again listed all the information on her clinical trial, everything that she's doing. So if you're interested, please check out those links and give her a shout out. What she's doing is really important, really necessary, and really appreciated. So we thank you, Carly, for all that you're doing, and look forward to hearing the results of your research.
Thanks so much for having me back. It's great to see so
Absolutely.
much enthusiasm for this
Thanks,
topic.
Carly. Thank you.
Absolutely. So just to wrap some things up, I want to thank our guests, which I just did, but Betsy, Carly, and Valerie, thank you for being here. As always, I want to thank the International OCD.
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome, Valerie.
Yes,
you guys are awesome.
Ethan.
No, thank you. You guys are awesome. As always, I want to thank the International OCD Foundation and behind the scenes Fran for crushing it with all the wonderful links and resources. We have tons of resources sitting here, so go crazy on resources. Also, it's worth announcing that next week is OCD Awareness Week. We have a ton of stuff planned. Lots of really cool programming. Saturday is the big virtual walk. You'll want to join us at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific for our official virtual launch. We've got some great guests, and I'm excited to see you all there. So you can definitely check out the IOCDF calendar for all the events and next week's festivities. We're really excited about that. If you haven't already and you want to be notified about all the programming the IOCDF is having over the next month, definitely be sure to subscribe and follow on Facebook and YouTube. And you can also now follow us on Twitch as well. So for all you gamers out there, you can also see us there as well. As always, if you have questions, either for Betsy, Valerie, or Carly, and you would like to ask them, or if we didn't get to your questions, please feel free to email us at info@iocdf.org. We are more than happy to, and if there's the email below, we're happy to answer your questions. Also, if you have topic suggestions or you want to reach out to me or anybody here, please never hesitate to reach out to the IOCDF for anything that you need. We're always here to support as best we can. So with all of that, have a wonderful evening. Stay safe, stay vigilant, feel the feels. Don't let OCD off the hook. And we will see you. Actually, I'll see you this Saturday.
Yes.
So we'll see you for OCD Awareness Week. Have a great evening.
Thank you, audience.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.